If we want to have all the lovely benefits of the modern world, then we got to do something. And relying on the same broken technology isn't going to cut it. It doesn't look like anybody's brave enough to try to reinvent the whole thing. Well, at least we can get the process started.
Hello, welcome to episode 67 of The Bitcoin Game. I'm Rob Mitchell. Eric Martindale is a hardcore cypherpunk hacker. Aside from working for several well-known Bitcoin companies in the past, Eric has been working on a project for years called Fabric. It's a decentralized peer-to-peer protocol created with the goal of replacing our current broken internet. Here it is, my interview with Eric Martindale, recorded at Bitcoin 2019. Here I am at Bitcoin 2019, sitting across from Eric Martindale, who I really know very little about, but you struck me immediately as a very, seems like, involved developer. I don't know. When did you get into Bitcoin?
It's been a long, crazy story, as I'm sure many people have too. But I first came across actually the original white paper like on the mailing list before the chain was created, but I had no idea what I was looking at. At the time, I was working in, I was doing an augmented reality startup. This is like way back in the day, and we knew about virtual currencies, right? World of Warcraft Gold was pretty much the biggest at the time, and you would see like gold farmers producing this virtual currency. So I really dismissed it because I hadn't connected in my mind the idea of proper digital cash and all of the original cypherpunk ideas. With it. So I really dismissed it. And then right about the slash dotting, I think it was like 2010, 2011, sometime in that time frame, I had been watching the financial crisis and the collapse, and it was suddenly where I had been completely disinterested in politics previously, completely not disinterested in economics, but didn't really know as much. So I kind of got involved or learned a lot through like the Ron Paul campaign and so on. And so when I saw Bitcoin again in 2010, 11, I saw it in a totally different light. And I ran a node and tried to play around with it, did a little bit of mining and so on. But it really, like, it was exciting to me as an idea, but it really didn't capture me fully until probably 2013. Where at that point I had kind of dug into how the system worked enough to kind of like understand its components and maybe see how the wide-reaching impact was. And so that's like a 4-year span of education before I became super excited about it. And at that point, I basically became the crazy uncle. At my dining room table at Thanksgiving dinner was a nightmare because all I wanted to talk about was how Bitcoin was going to save the world and how Bitcoin is the future of everything, and I was running around my town. I was still an entrepreneur at that time, doing a different company actually.
And what town was this?
Oh, this is I'm from Wendell, North Carolina, which is a small farm town east of Raleigh. The Research Triangle Park region in Raleigh, North Carolina, Raleigh-Durham. That's the Triangle area. Has Duke University, NC State. It has a pretty high concentration of PhDs. So there's a lot of smart people around there, but nobody was doing this Bitcoin thing. Like, nobody had even heard of it. So I was running around like telling people like, "Hey man, are you going to accept Bitcoin at this coffee shop?" And trying to convince a restaurant owner, "Hey man, can you please accept Bitcoin because we gotta have a revolution going on here." So. Yeah, and then at the end of 2013, I had been talking publicly about Bitcoin. I tweeted, "Bitcoin crosses $100, historic moment," right? And so I got a company reached out to me by the name of BitPay, and so I said, "Well, what I'm doing right now isn't fully working out, so why don't I give this full-time Bitcoin thing a try?" And so that's how I ended up working for BitPay, and that's what really brought me into the space.
Wait, so how did you get on BitPay's radar?
I do actually remember the recruiting company that they were using was using some sort of new software that was new, quote, quote. I don't think it's even that fancy anymore. Crawling social media and looking for topical density and so on. So I came up in the recruiting pipeline, and so they looked at my profile and saw that I'd been talking about Bitcoin for a couple of years prior. So they invited me into interview, and the rest was what I did.
So when was this?
That was at the end of 2013. So
Okay.
I started I started in December of 2013. So I think that was like right in the height of like that one of those first big bubbles.
Right.
Right?
And
So-
BitPay was still beloved in the community.
Yeah, that's kind of that's quite the story there. Yeah, BitPay was really the golden darling. They were helping the economy grow, the Bitcoin economy grow, by facilitating that merchant consumer relationship and making it easy for businesses to adopt Bitcoin as a payment option. And the numbers were great. During my time there, I think we added 150,000 Bitcoin accepting merchants. And I think by the time we left, I think the total number worldwide of merchants accepting Bitcoin was like 400,000 or something like that.
I used BitPay just because I didn't code, and it was a way to back end, kind of like using PayPal or something to accept Bitcoin on a website. So
Yeah.
I didn't use it to convert or anything, but
Yeah, I mean when like some of these bigger companies that I actually used started accepting it, I was spending Bitcoin, I was giving Bitcoin away, right? Like I was at a point where if I met somebody on the street, I would strike up a conversation intentionally just to tell them about the good gospel of Bitcoin. And then during the conversation, as part of my effort to convince them that this is the way to go, I'd say, all right, there's a bar down there. I'm going to buy you a beer. So you're going to install this wallet on your phone, and I'm going to send you $4 worth of Bitcoin, which is going to buy you a beer at that bar. Okay? And you're going to go down there and you're going to go buy that beer, right?
and what blockchain wallet, or what was the wallet?
Oh, at the time, actually, we had built our own wallet called Copay. So yeah, I was shilling our own stuff, but I would also install the Andreas Schildebach wallet. That was the main one actually that I kind of started with before we built our own. So that's Andreas Schildebach on Android. He wrote a Bitcoin wallet. So. Yeah, even at the time, I think there was another one. Airbits had come out.
He was from Southern California. He
Yeah.
used to come present at our meetups since Paul did and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I'd promote that. I'd promote pretty much whatever I thought was the best for that particular person. So Airbits had a directory built in. So in a lot of cases, if they were curious, is like who accepts it? You install Airbits, and then you have a full list of all the places that you can spend it. So, yeah, I gave away a lot of Bitcoin that way.
Wow. Well, I hope you had a lot more than you gave away.
No, I lost all of my Bitcoin in a tragic boating accident.
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's such a shame, man. But I'm still here, and I still believe in the vision, so...
All right. So you worked for BitPay, and BitPay also would sponsor our meetups in LA, too. We had the local BitPay person, and I was so impressed with her and her Tesla and everything. It seemed like, wow, these guys are doing great.
Yeah, at the time, BitPay was really investing in infrastructure, so building open source products to give away to the community so that other companies could use them and build out the necessary services. And that's what really excites me in general is, the rising tide lifts all boats strategy. So the more, the easier it is to build things, the faster the transition is going to take place. And the less discomfort people are going to experience during the process.
So what did you do at BitPay?
I was hired as their developer evangelist. So I was responsible for, going out and talking about the open source products that we had developed, as well as listening to feedback from the community and then helping lead the internal developer teams towards building better and more improved products.
What happened after BitPay?
So after BitPay, I worked there for just about 2 years. In the summer of 2015, I basically was starting to get a little bit constrained by some of the policy changes that were taking place at BitPay, and it was time for me to try something else. And I had some big ideas, and I wanted to give them a shot. So for that summer, I basically decided to kind of step away from BitPay and work on my own project, which was called Fabric at the time. And I wasn't quite sure how to even describe the problem that I was trying to solve. So I spent a lot of time researching and building little prototypes and trying to see how things work. And it was really a very educational and informative period of time for me. And then after about 4 or 5 months of just that, trying to figure out how to make this thing work, I got introduced to a couple of guys at Blockstream and was then invited to join Blockstream to work there, to do very similar things to what I'd been doing at BitPay. So I was like, well, that's such a great opportunity to work with actual Bitcoin core developers and absolute legends in the cypherpunk history, Adam Back and several of the other people there. So I really honestly I jumped at the opportunity, and then I worked there for 2 years, basically leading up the promotion of the Elements project, which is a fork of Bitcoin that implements things like confidential transactions and some new opcodes that make smart contracting a lot easier. And it's an experimental. It was meant to implement this concept called sidechains, which I think most people have kind of heard about by now. Blockstream is one of the original authors of that paper. And Elements was an implementation of that, and I was responsible for going out into the commercial world and helping these businesses understand why they should be using Bitcoin-based technology as opposed to blockchain, a blockchain of their own, right? So that was a pretty uphill battle. I remember finding myself at the DTCC.
DTCC?
I think it's like the Depository Trade Clearing and Settlement or something like that. It's like basically they are responsible for the settlement of the vast majority of trades in the Western world, certainly in the U.S. markets. They relocated from New York to New Jersey, probably for regulatory reasons, like 4 or 5 years ago. But they're a very big institution that basically is no longer necessary in a post-Bitcoin world. And the parties that were there were J.P. Morgan, IBM, the real big players who are seeing this Bitcoin thing happen, but they don't like its politics. So they are like, well, how can we get in on this if it's clearly a trend and it says that it solves all these problems? So that's where you get the whole blockchain mania thing coming from. And it was really an uphill battle trying to say well, you should be more friendly to Bitcoin. Well, it turns out seems like they recognize that Bitcoin makes them irrelevant in most cases. So it was a struggle. We didn't really get that much traction with the Elements project, but we did commercialize it into a product which made it out onto the market called Liquid. And Liquid is a commercial sidechain that runs has a number of nodes that operate that do the block validation. It's called a federation. And hopefully that goes well. I found myself under the same pressures at Blockstream that I did at BitPay, where scope got more and more constrained, and it became more and more difficult to actually affect the types of changes that you wanted to see. And by that point, I felt that I had learned enough about all the underlying cryptographic protocols, and I felt fairly confident that I had a good description of the problem that I was solving. So I said, okay, now it's time to take attempt at solving the problem. So I left, I guess it was 2017 at this point. So summer of 2017, I did a very similar thing to summer 2015, and just decided I'm going to make this thing a go, and that's what I've been doing since.
And this thing being the Fabric.
That's right. So Fabric was the idea that I'd kind of started in the summer of 2015, and it is a protocol for the establishment and execution of peer-to-peer contracts. So this is truly true smart contracts that do not require Turing completeness. In fact, I think Turing completeness is a drawback. We implement what's called finitary completeness, where you know all possible states of the system before you sign the contract, right?
And why is Turing complete a problem?
So Turing complete a Turing complete system, by definition, introduces a problem known as the halting problem. And the halting problem says that if a program implements Turing completeness, you cannot prove when it will end. Okay, so this means that a program could potentially enter an endless loop, and your money might be locked into the contract forever. You might lose your money. That would be an implementation bug, of course. No scrupulous developer intentionally does such things. But it's in systems where Turing completeness exists. Those bugs inevitably emerge, and I think I think especially when you're dealing with digital money, I think it is utterly irresponsible to allow someone to lose money unless they knew ahead of time that the contract had the potential for them to lose money.
So this would be a critique of Ethereum, I assume.
Yeah, I've been very vocal about my critique of Ethereum since the very beginning, actually. I think a lot of very obvious engineering mistakes were made in the design, and I think it's a crying shame that so many people have lost money because it's such a complex thing, and there's no possible way for them to understand it. It's just another way, quote, for them to get rich, you know?
Do you have a sense, not to get too into Ethereum, but have a sense any of that will be improved with their Ethereum 2 or whatever their next
I do. I obviously, the very idea that they're implementing an Ethereum 2.0 means that they recognize at least some of the mistakes or flaws that were pointed out to them privately first and then later much more publicly because they still weren't listening. But I'm not hopeful that it will be a successful effort. I think they still cling to a lot of the flawed ideas that got them there in the first place. And I also think the centralized governance model will lead to a very, very slow and contentious process because there exists a control that can be adjusted, right? Because there exists a mechanism to exert design power over the system. Naturally, it's going to be many different competing interests will be fighting for that power, and that'll slow things down.
And I have to admit, I really don't pay that much attention to what Ethereum's doing. I, for whatever reason, thought they were working mostly on scaling issues. I didn't even know if they were working on, problems with the Turing-complete language.
Talk about that more broadly, right? Like the very design decision to put the statefulness of each contract on the main chain, it makes the system balloon out of control, like even on paper. Like if you just do some back of the napkin calculations and you figure like, okay, people are going to be using this thing for running all these different smart contracts, and that data lives in the chain, which stays around forever. It's just such an obvious thing to me. It makes it so difficult for me to understand why these people are continuing to, especially some of these very, very vehement supporters, right?
So I don't even know how much to get into this, because I'm not a technical person, but that has always made sense to me. But it seems like some very smart technical people are involved in Ethereum, so I guess I just, I'm not technical enough to try to argue with anyone, but what do you think the explanation is for people you'd probably consider intelligent being into Ethereum?
Frankly, I think a lot of it is ego. I think a lot of very excited, enthusiastic developers look at the idea and sort of like the idea of rebelling against a status quo, and that they think they can do better, right? They think that they can be the iconic story of, you know what, we're going to do something different. We're going to disregard all previous, insights, and we're going to do it our own way. And I think a lot of it boils down to ego and just unwillingness to listen to people who've been there before and can at least tell you their experience.
Gotcha. So I didn't mean to get you off track talking about your fabric and stuff. So that would be a finite, you said? What was it?
Finitary complete, yeah. Or you can say finite complete system as opposed to Turing complete. And it basically means that you can draw a map of all possible states of the program or all possible situations that the program can find itself in, because all data input is known, all states of the system are known. Now you can look at a contract, whether it be a financial contract or a contract for service with some third-party provider, whatever it may be, or a second party actually. You'll be able to see the terms, and you'll know how it executes, and then you decide to sign it or not. And once you've signed it, then it will execute, and you know that it will execute exactly the way you expected it to, because there is no non-determinism in the system.
And this works without anything like a blockchain?
So we describe this as a layer 3 system, and I'm putting my hands up in the air here, doing the aliens thing, saying layer 3, right? But because we already have layer 2 systems, and those are still being fleshed out. The reason we call it a layer 3 system is because we're using a lot of the components from layer 2 systems, such as Lightning and various side chains, and composing them together in more complex applications. That's really what I look at layer 3 as. But we're not a blockchain. We don't implement a blockchain. We are strictly a peer-to-peer protocol, right? And we've been trying to say this from the beginning, but we're always lumped into the blockchain projects. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it is necessary for. I mean, if you require global consensus, a blockchain is the way to do that. And if a blockchain is the way to do that, and global consensus is what you desire on the state of some system, then it seems like Bitcoin is the best solution possible for that thing. It's certainly the most successful. And if I'm building a business on something, I have no interest in building it on something that is not the best, right? I want to choose the best option. So what we made the decision strictly to make the default currency within Fabric Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is if we're designing a system, that's already going to be hard enough on its own to build a network and launch a business that way. Trying to launch our own currency, that's a whole nother problem, right? And now we have 2 problems. And as an entrepreneur, I'm trying to minimize my problems, not add more. So we don't want to try to launch our own currency. We're not interested in that. We're just simply interested in deploying the system. And there is already a digital currency that works. So we'll just use that. So.
Okay. And is it layer 3 just for scaling reasons rather than
scaling is a side effect, actually. It's really the fact that we don't need global consensus. In fact, we don't want it. Because we're designing a peer-to-peer protocol, there's serious privacy concerns, right? The privacy is the primary motivation for not using a global consensus network. It's nobody else's business what contracts I sign with you or what contracts you sign with that person or what they're doing over there. It's none of our business. They have the freedom to participate in voluntary trade. So what we're trying to do is build a system that facilitates that without requiring a legal system.
And what are the types of contracts or trade or whatever? What are the use cases that you're envisioning?
We're actually fairly excited about all the financial use cases. Free and fair trade is, an essential component of human liberty. So we're pretty focused. I mean, most of our clients right now are in the financial markets cases where we're building things like dark pools. So these are the types of digital markets where the order book is invisible and you can't see the volume or the trades or who's trading. You only put in your order and get an execution or not, right? So it's almost like a blinded auction. I think this prevents all sorts of financial crimes and so on. So, eliminating financial crime and the sort of manipulation and things that led us to adopt Bitcoin in the first place, hopefully will be able to be minimized.
These contracts, would this be all part of your system or written kind of on top of your system?
Yeah, so we're deploying a toolkit, right? Like a toolbox for other companies, other developers to build their own products, right? So it's more like we're giving people the tools. I always like the toolbox analogy because we can design something that solves X, Y, or Z, but it may not meet all of the needs of any particular audience. And people should have the freedom to design the systems that fit their needs anyways. Now, the one thing that we do enforce is the protocol, right? The description, the language, I would say, of how you establish these agreements. And then from there, you can use any layer 2 system, any layer 1 system if you really want. But all we're doing is giving people a toolkit to put things together, right? And then a language that they can use to expose their decisions to the rest of the network so that they can find counterparties for their trades.
Okay. And what were were you saying financial crimes, or what was it you were saying this would prevent? I'm trying to remember your wording.
Like front running in an exchange. So like exchanges, there are very strict regulations around this that are supposed to prevent these types of behaviors. But because of the design of the system today, there's a third party involved in every trade. And because that third party exists, and many other third parties that are kind of invisible behind the scenes, right, like network operators and so on, because everything is unencrypted. It's actually designed on like 30-year-old technology. It's all pretty bad, actually. You get into the high frequency trading, and they've done some really interesting things with network infrastructure. But by and large, the system is rife with overhead, is the simplest way to put it. And that overhead consists of intentional malice done by bad actors in the system, where they are either catching the quotes ahead of time and then secretly telling their buddy, hey, dude, get in on this trade, because like the price is going to move this much tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. It's like that happens all the time. If we had a blinded order book, it'd be impossible, right? If there was no central aggregator of these orders, then that type of manipulation would be impossible.
Okay. So there wouldn't be middlemen being able to do it, but people could still...
People still and always will be Byzantine, right?
So it's not a magic bullet. It just gets rid of certain
Gets rid of a lot of overhead. It cuts out the middleman from all financial transactions, yeah.
The Bitcoin game is sponsored by BTCKeychain.com, probably the most well-known Bitcoin keychains in the world. Get your own. Just go to BTCKeychain.com.
What are your fields of expertise to even be doing all this kind of stuff?
I'm not an expert in anything.
Okay, well, what are you good at, I guess? Kind of good at, I don't know.
I've always been I call myself a hacker. I don't even call myself an engineer. My dad kicked me out of the house at an early age, sent me down to the library, and I had limited computer time on dial-up internet. It's like I was always fascinated by technology just because of I guess I saw the power of it. Trying to break apart the games on my computer so I could figure out how to change them to do what I wanted them to do instead of the way the developer designed it. I've just read as much as I can, hung out with as many smart people as I can. I would say my biggest focus has been on distributed systems. Pretty much my entire study, I would say, anything that I like in engineering have been working on has been specifically to try to build distributed systems, even going back to, the augmented reality stuff and the healthcare stuff that I used to do. It's like, how do I make this system more efficient and make it operate in a way that I'm going to use the phrase anti-fragile, but in a way that the system, doesn't fall over when one part of it breaks. It actually can get stronger, right? So, even the augmented reality thing, running everything on a server isn't going to cut it because, augmented reality is a real-time thing. You need it to be very, very close to you locally. So distributed systems, peer-to-peer networks made the most sense even then. And that's like right even before I got into Bitcoin. BitTorrent, that's another great example. The whole peer-to-peer revolution that was started because of file sharing. Even IRC to some extent. IRC is federated, not peer-to-peer. But all of the technologies that I kind of looked at when I was young, like a kid really, really stood out to me because they weren't just your typical client-server model, right? They were something different, and that really captured my attention, and that's probably what I've focused most of my time on. So I learned, about the CAP theorem, all sorts of stuff in historical distributed systems research that apply to traditional databases first, and then Bitcoin kind of suddenly brings into the limelight because Bitcoin is a beautiful distributed system, and nobody kind of took that approach to the Byzantine generals problem before, and that's kind of what makes it unique. So it was really an innovation in distributed systems, and it was just kind of a perfect mesh when I found Bitcoin and understood it. That's the hard part, right? So was the Byzantine generals problem something like you were aware of before Bitcoin? Yeah, absolutely. It's faulty systems, right? If you're building a database, which most applications end up with some kind of database of some sort. So you want to have some redundancy, right? But what happens if one of your disks fail, right? And maybe your clients are connecting to that server. That's a Byzantine failure. Now the other subcomponent of Byzantine is you can't tell if it's a faulty system or if it's an intentional bad actor, right? And those are always something that you're meant to be concerned. I've always protected my systems with cryptographic signatures in the first place, but you don't know. You don't know if that key has been compromised. So yeah, Byzantine General's problem. And it took me a while to wrap my head around the paper though. I read the paper and when it came out, and I was like, okay, I don't understand how this solves the problem until I got to the economics, until I understood the economics. And then I realized the connection between human behavior and technology. And then I was like, okay, distributed systems, I think I understand now. And now I'm going to understand them as socio-technical systems where, it can't be all code. Human behavior has just as much of an impact as the code does. Basically, I view it all as the socio-technical system now.
So where is Fabric in state of development? When do you think it'll be ready to go?
So we've been working finally on the implementation for about the past 7 or 8 months. There's a lot of components that have already been built out, and in fact, everything is already public on my GitHub. I've been doing all development in the open since day one. I just haven't been tweeting about it. So people are welcome to go to GitHub and check it out. But I think we're going to cut the 0.1 release of Fabric sometime in mid-August is what it's looking like. We are most likely going to have a couple releases of our other projects in the interim. So that includes Maki. So Maki is a UI library that we've already published. We published 0.1, and the current version is 0.2. But we're going to be publishing 0.3, which is the long-planned support for deploying Maki-built applications to Fabric. So this is kind of the preparation to help people start building apps ahead of time in such a way that when they press publish, it'll run on top of Fabric instead of running on the server that they bought.
Run on top of Fabric instead of the server. Where's it running if it's not on their server?
The way
it's distributed.
That's right.
Okay.
So when you build a Fabric contract, you're writing what's called a secure multi-party contract, or SMPC. MPC is really the phrase in academia that's used. And what you're doing is you're designing a circuit, a series of logic gates that will be distributed to the network. And in order for the program to run, those nodes need to pass messages to each other back and forth across the network until the sufficient condition is met, and then the data is generated and you have your answer. So this allows you to create something that's called a homomorphic property. So a homomorphically encrypted contract or program is a piece of data or a program that you can execute on data that you can't see. Like the data is encrypted, but you can compute a meaningful result out of that data. So the simplest example is, and known for a long time, is Pallier crypto system. And that allows you to add 2 encrypted numbers and get an encrypted answer that only the person who encrypted the original components can decrypt. So this allows you to, pay someone to do some work that they don't know, they don't have any access to the data that they're working on, but you can guarantee that they're going to generate an accurate result, whatever the data was. And so if you look at that in the simplest case, it's really interesting. But then if you look at that as a market case and you say, well, right now people are just kind of hitting web servers, and then they're trusting the web server to do the right thing, and then it's giving the data back. And all of your data lives on that web server. It's encrypted over the wire using SSL and TLS and all that, but if that server gets compromised, all your data is compromised. And we're seeing this again and again and again and again and again. 120 million credit cards stolen in one leak. I think it was last year or the year before, like that. Right? It's because of these centralized systems. This data is living unencrypted on these servers. And it's it is to some degree the incompetence of the operators. But at the same time, there's really not that many better options, right? So the thinking here is that we're trying to kill the client server model and make it so that everything is a distributed system that is verifiable. And before anybody even signs a contract, you at least can see the risk, right? You know that there's a 5% chance that this condition happens, and so subsequently, okay. As opposed to putting your money into a contract and then crossing your fingers and hoping that it executes successfully, right? At least here you can write formal mathematical proofs now because you made the system finitarily complete that even if you can't see the data in the contract, you can use the math to verify that it did exactly execute as we expected it to.
All right. So when you were just talking there, I just was getting the sense that you have really, I don't know, big hopes for how big this could get as far as...
I do, but I have to dial it back all because, small bites, right?
Sure.
And that's also why, I haven't really talked about Fabric in public. I talk to people, like if I meet people, I'm working on this thing called Fabric, happy to talk about it. And all my development's in open anyways. We've got 2 other engineers, so it's not just me. But I think we're getting to the point where like we want to show a demonstrable example of this thing in action, and hopefully, through our paying clients and through the rest of the ecosystem, hopefully more and more people start adopting it. And it's not going to be an overnight thing, but yeah, my overall hopes and dreams are, look, everything on the internet, everything is broken. Everything about modern computing is fundamentally broken, insecure from the ground up. The entire design of modern computing leads to inevitable flaws in everything. It's a house of cards, and we're watching everything fail in slow motion around us. So the thinking is like, well, looks like we do need, if we want to have all the lovely benefits of the modern world, then we got to do something. And relying on the same broken technology isn't going to cut it. And it doesn't look like anybody's brave enough to try to reinvent the whole thing. Well, at least we can get the process started, right? We can't do it alone. Like we need millions of other projects out there doing their own niche thing for this to really take off. So it's really a struggle for me. One bite at a time. It's really easy to get into the hardware and say, well, we need to deploy a new mesh network globally, so the state doesn't control the pipes of the internet. Well, that's true, but that's a really long process, unless you do something like incentivize mesh networks or something like that, which that's what I'm actually hopeful for. But everything in order, right? Everything in the right sequence of events, and hopefully is meant more and more people start getting excited about these things. Hopefully, more and more people start building cool projects.
So who would be the early people to join these mesh networks?
In terms of right now there are existing mesh networks that already exist. Portland area has a pretty big one that's pretty exciting. There's a lot of there's a small community of people that have been trying this stuff, but the technology only really has recently kind of gotten to a point where like, okay, now we figured out how to do Wi-Fi over about 90 miles, right? These are the kind of distances that you really got to figure out. Otherwise, you need to do a huge capital investment into pipes, right? You need to lay down wires. So, like, distance is still a problem. A lot of the stuff is an issue.
Okay, so this is an entirely independent network, not using any of the existing infrastructure?
So Fabric is a software protocol. So Fabric exists as an overlay network currently on top of TCP. We do plan to migrate towards UDP. So the difference between TCP and UDP being TCP has transmission control. That's what it's for. It basically, if a message doesn't get to its intended destination, it resends the message. UDP, on the other hand, broadcasts. It's like fire and forget. It's like, well, and it's more useful for things like video streaming, for example, where you're watching a video. If you miss a frame that was like 30 seconds ago, it doesn't matter. Like, you can forget about it. You don't need to congest the wire for it. So yeah, like Fabric is one part of my sort of bigger goals in life, really. And it's the software component. It's the language. It's the computational substrate over which I'm hoping more and more programs will be run, because it's safer this way. It's more secure this way. Look, man, if some other project wants to take the same idea and implement it and do it slightly different, please, by all means. That means I get to move on to the next part of the process, which is figuring out, okay, how do we unown the pipes, right? How do we take back control of the pipes for us as peers, as opposed to trusting, the government to regulate these monopolistic ISPs, especially here in the United States, where it's the worst, right? Like in most areas in the United States, you only have one choice. I mean, you really only have one choice of internet provider. You really only have one choice of water provider. You really only have one choice of electricity provider. So how can we possibly expect these prices to be fair if there's only one provider? It's like, if we had a competitive market for all of these things, wouldn't that be a little bit better? Because then instead of getting screwed over, 10x by this guy, you could get screwed over 8x by that guy, right? And of course, the end goal being is that everyone operates their own stuff. And until it's so damn easy that a caveman could do it, then it's just not going to happen. So it's a dual struggle, right? It's the pushing of the technology to make it possible, and then the pushing of the user experience such that it becomes easy enough for your average Joe to have his own ISP as opposed to paying for someone else's.
So is this just a passion project for you and your team members?
Yeah, I would say every single one of us is passionate about this. I mean, look, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm building a business. Like, I make no qualms about that. But it's really because I see a lot of injustice in the world, and I don't see easy ways to address it. I see a lot of surface level ways that kind of make you feel good when you virtue signal about them. But if you really want to make change, you got to go out and write some code, take some action, right?
Very cool. This is a business venture for you. Yep. How do you end up monetizing your network?
So we're not planning on monetizing the network directly. We are going to be deploying products inside of the network or on top of the network that provide needed services. So very, very specific domain-specific services. We want to deploy a handful of them as the network begins to grow, such that first of all, the economy functions because those services are going to be necessary, and two, hopefully we'll inspire other people to create competitors, and the more competitors there are to each of those services, the better, right? Because then they're marketing for audiences as well, and because everybody's participating in this one common framework, everybody benefits. So. We're going to be deploying a couple of services. I mean, look, I've got a lot of little hackathon-style personal projects. Like I built a personal radio jukebox, right? Like a streaming service. Like all these little toys. Or I want to build a game, right? Like we're building a little side game. We have a big user base for that. We have about 150,000 users on that one now.
And what is this?
Well, I have all these little side projects,
right?
And Fabric is like a way to unify all of them in such a way that I don't have to keep paying for hosting on all these things, right? So like hopefully like we can run them on a network instead of so. So the project is called RPG. It is a traditional old school text-based MUD-style role-playing game. And people, like in the true open sandbox sense, authors contribute fiction, like written fiction, in segments to these larger stories. And we designed a system that allows people to design characters that move through these worlds, can accumulate items in those worlds, can trade, can fight, it's basically a virtual world simulator. And just, this is literally the project that I started when I was 18, and it's just been kind of growing ever since. I've never marketed it or anything.
Yeah, how old
that.
are you now? I don't know. You don't have to tell me.
I just turned power of 2, man. I just exited my prime year, 31 being prime. But I'm 32 now. So that was 2005 when I started that. As it was just like a little fun side project for me and my friends because I loved playing text-based role-playing games as a kid. Fascinating. You don't need video graphics to describe things, and frankly, it's probably probably better for you that in order to play the game, you have to like learn linguistic skills and communication skills, and so. Yeah, we've got that project. We did accumulate about 150,000 users over the past, I guess, almost 15 years. And that's like going to be one of our biggest flagship deployments is this game on top of Fabric. And it's not a game. It's 3,000 or 4,000 games that our users have made for themselves. And we just created the platform for them to create those things, not like...
But they're totally open. You can play everybody's games, or no?
So most of the games are open. Yeah. Most games are just anyone can join. A lot of people do like to keep their groups small. I mean, it's just like, I don't know, Dungeons and Dragons. Like, you usually play Dungeons and Dragons or any other sort of like fantasy tabletop game with like 4 or 5 at most like 10 people, right? Like 10 people is just way too much, right? Because you need to have, connections and relationships. Our biggest universe, we call them, on RPG is actually about, let me get the numbers right. I think it's about 8 or 9,000 players in that one universe is the biggest. And there's a big gap between the biggest and then the next biggest, right? The next biggest one is only like a couple hundred, and then the vast majority of them sit at like 20 or 30, and then there's like a long tail of people below that.
And is there ever a thing where you can just clone the world so people can be playing the same game but with different players involved?
Absolutely. There is a very important question which we have not made any public statement on whatsoever, other than if you publish content, it's your content, you own it. The intellectual property copyright question is a big one. If people can just copy a game, what are the mechanisms that we provide? Some sort of kickback to the original creator. We would need to make decisions on that, and we're not really in a position where that's our core focus right now. We don't want to be the ones making the decisions anyways. We want the individual creators to be the ones making the decisions.
You got a lot going on.
People call me crazy. I roll out of bed, I start working, and I only go to sleep when I'm exhausted from working. But it's like I wouldn't have it any other way, quite frankly. Like I live, eat, and breathe everything that I do. So
it seems like it. How many hours do you sleep on average? One of those like 4 hours a night guys?
6 or 7. I really do try to get my 8 hours of sleep. Okay. So like my cutoff is like 16 hours. So, but I also work. I'll work for like 20 or 24 hours straight, and then I'll crash out for like 8 hours, and then do it again. I try to do that as minimally as possible, but there's just too much to do, and there's a lot of look with 150,000 people on one of the sub projects. We've got a whole team of like 30 or 40 volunteers that are helping manage that process, right? So it's like wearer of many hats is probably a bad description of the problem. Like you can't go far enough as explaining how many different things you got to do to kind of keep all these things in motion. So I don't know. I'm just thankful that there's so many people out there that volunteer and are passionate about this stuff. Frankly,
do you have some totally unrelated hobbies you're into or activities or?
Yeah. Not that I've practiced them. I mean, I like to work out, and I like to try to stay in shape. I just got done with a rib injury, actually. Unfortunately, I broke my rib, so I lost a lot of weight, unfortunately, and so I'm gonna get back to it. So I'm like feeling good now. But I actually used to compete and fight, and like now there's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym right next door to where I live, so it's a Gracie jiu-jitsu gym. So I love Gracie. I love the Gracie jiu-jitsu style and the story of combat sports and how it changed because of jiu-jitsu, and specifically the Gracie family. Kickboxing, like I used to compete, so it's like it's still there, and I still like to hit the bag, and I still like to roll, so I try to do that as much as I can.
All right, okay, let's give it a go right now.
Yeah, you ready to roll? Let's go. I'm down.
Well, that was fun. And take it from me, don't mess with Eric Martindale. Check out this episode's show notes page for links and other information at thebitcoingame.com. And you can find me on Twitter. I'm the BTC Game. I hope you'll join me for my next interview, a really long conversation with Paul Stortz. See you next time.